Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Miras Hashem Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Rosh Hashanah, and today we begin on the bottom of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph in Siman Tov Kuf Tzadik Beis Sif Beis. And here we have another interesting halachah that came to the fore last year during COVID-19, when a lot of people, including myself, were unable to go to shul on Rosh Hashanah. I and my family were in quarantine on Rosh Hashanah. Baruch Hashem, everybody is well. But this halacha really came to the fore. And that is, we know that in many places, and we discussed this in previous shiurim, in many places that daven nusach svard, they have the minig to blow shofar al seder habrachos in middle of the shtil shemoneh esrei of mussaf. So everybody is standing and davening the shtil shemoneh esrei of mussaf. And when they finish malchiyos, they stop, they wait for the Baal Tekiah, and then the Baal Tekiah blows Tekiah Shvarim Trua Tekiah, Tekiah Shvarim Tekiah, Tekiah Trua Tekiah. Then they go, everybody davens zichronos, and again, everybody waits, and at the end of zichronos, the Baal Tekiah blows again, and then everybody davens shofaros, and at the end of shofaros, the Baal Tekiah blows again. Alright, many people, especially people who either daven nusach svard, or they grew up maybe davening nusach svard, when they found themselves in quarantine, especially if they were able to blow shofar for themselves, they came up with a very interesting idea. They said, you know what, we'll blow 30 tekiyas before mussaf, we'll blow the tekiyas to miyushiv before we daven mussaf, and then in our shtil shemoneh esrei, we'll blow another 30 kolos al seder berachos, the way nusach svard does, in the middle of the shtil shemoneh esrei, and by doing that, we'll get another 30 kolos, but not only will we get another 30 kolos, we'll be yotze the idea of blowing shofar al seder habrachos. Like this in shul every year, we hear the kolos of the shofar after malchiyos, zichronos, and shofaros. We can't do it now because we're not in shul, so we'll blow during the shtil shemoneh esrei. Here we see that the halachah is not that way. Not only is it, you're not supposed to do it, there's no purpose to do it at all. Says the Machaber here in Siv Beis, Yachid, an individual who is davening alone b'yechidus, einay mafsik liskaya berachos. He is not mafsik in his shtil shemoneh esrei to blow shofar al seder berachos va'afilu, and this is true even if he himself is not going to blow, but he has somebody else home with him who's capable of blowing the shofar. So don't think that it's only a question of making a hefsek in the shtil shemoneh esrei, and we don't want you to make a hefsek in your shtil shemoneh esrei by picking up a shofar and blowing shofar. Even if you have somebody home with you and you could motion to him and he'll blow the shofar, still, va'afilu yesh lo misha yiskaloi, even if you have somebody else to blow for you, no. You do not blow shofar in middle of the shtil shemoneh esrei when you're davening b'yechidus. And the Ramah says, Haga, Ella, rather, what do you do? Ella toikim loy koidem sheyispal al mussaf. Rather, you should blow for this individual who's davening b'yechidus, or he could blow for himself before he davens mussaf. And the purpose of that is kedei la'arbev hasatan. We want the kolos of the shofar to throw away the satan, to confuse the satan, so that the satan shouldn't be mekatrig while this person is davening mussaf. Ve'ein tzrichin liskaya lo yishenis, and there is no need to blow shofar a second time after the shtil shemoneh esrei or in the middle of the shtil shemoneh esrei. Once you had the 30 kolos of the tekiyas to miyushiv, there is no chiyuv of tekiyas to mu'umid. That's what the Ramah means here. He doesn't mean that there's no inyan of hearing 100 kolos. If you could hear 100 kolos, so hear 100 kolos. But what he does mean is that there's no chiyuv of tekiyas de mu'umid. The chiyuv that we have of tekiyas de mu'umid to hear the kolos of the shofar al seder berachos on malchiyos, zichronos, and on shofaros, that's only b'tzibur. It doesn't exist b'yechidus. There is no such chiyuv. There's no inyan of tekiyas al seder berachos when you're davening b'yechidus. Let's see this inside in the words of the Mishnah Berurah. Let's turn back to Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Vav. Va'afilu yesh lo misha yiskaloi. Even if you have somebody else who could blow for you in the middle of the shtil shemoneh esrei, so you don't have to blow for yourself, still it's not done. Ritzonai loymar, what the Mechaber wants to say over here is, Gam kein einoi mafsik kedei l'shaman. You don't even take a break in your shtil shemoneh esrei just to listen to the words to listen to the sounds of the shofar. We're not mafsik at all in the shtil shemoneh esrei when you're davening b'yechidus. Shaloi tikdu l'skaya al haseder ela b'tzibur, because they were not misakin the concept of blowing the shofar al haseder. They weren't. I'm sorry, my phone is interrupting me here. I'm shutting it off. Shaloi tikdu l'skaya al haseder. They were never misakin to blow shofar al seder habrachos on malchiyos, zichronos, and shofaros ela b'tzibur. That was only done b'tzibur. Now you might. Well, let's go further first. Says the Mishnah Berurah cutting zayin elo toikim loy ritzonai loymar. What the Ramah wants to say over here is im loy shama hatikiyos demiyushiv mipi hashliach tzibur. If this person who's davening mussaf b'yechidus was not able to be in shul for the tekiyas demiyushiv, if he already heard the tekiyas demiyushiv in shul, so fine. So he heard the tekiyas demiyushiv in shul, and now he'll go ahead and he'll daven his mussaf. But if it's somebody that's at home in quarantine, so he didn't hear the tekiyas demiyushiv at all, then toikim b'shviloi kaidem sheyispal mussaf. Then somebody should blow for him, or he should blow for himself, so that he could hear shofar before he davens mussaf. Why? Kidei la'arbev hasatan, in order to confuse the satan, shelo yikatreg alav b'shas tfilasai, so that the satan should not be mekatreg. The satan should not act as a prosecutor before he davens mussaf. If he was not able to hear the tekiyas demiyushiv in shul, and he's not able to blow shofar himself, and he has nobody to blow the shofar for him, so then so then he should daven mussaf, and he should endeavor to make sure to hear the kolos of the shofar after mussaf. In other words, it's not a chiyuv that you must hear the shofar before mussaf. We want you to hear the shofar before mussaf because we want to be ma'arbiv the satan. But if you can't, you can't. So then you still have a chiyuv to hear shofar, so you'll hear shofar after mussaf. Okay. Now we go to Samach Zayin number Beis, 2 lines down, Siv Gimel. Loy yosiach, well, one should not speak. Loy hatoikeya, not the baltoikeya is going to blow shofar. V'loy hatzibur, and not the tzibur is going to be listening to the sounds of the shofar. Bein tekiyas shemiyushiv, between hearing the tekiyas demiyushiv that we blow before mussaf, litekiyas shemoneh, and between when we hear the sounds of the shofar, the tekiyas demiyushiv that we hear in middle of mussaf. Now, sometimes that could be a rather lengthy period of time. You have the tekiyas demiyushiv that take place before the shtil shemoneh esrei of mussaf. Then you have the shtil shemoneh esrei of mussaf is a rather lengthy tefillah. Then sometimes you have to wait for the shliach tzibur to begin. Then the shliach tzibur begins, and you have to go through the whole beginning of chazaras hashatz until you get to malchiyos, zichronos, v'shofaros. Finally, when you get to the end of malchiyos, you're going to start blowing the tekiyas demiyushiv. During that entire time, says the Mechaber, lo yasiach, lo yatekeya, v'lo yatzibur, not the baltekeya, not the tzibur is going to hear the shofar. Nobody should be mafsik b'dibur. Nobody should speak until after they hear all of the tekiyas. Says the Mishnah Berurah cutting ches, lo yasiach. Why? What's the problem with speaking? The bracha shemavarach kaidem hatekiyos, because the bracha that you listen to before the tekiyas demiyushiv lishmaya kol shofar koi gamkein al tekiyas demoment. That bracha is covering all of the kolos of the shofar that you're going to hear in today's davening. Both tekiyas demiyushiv and the tekiyas demoment. They're all covered by those brachas that you heard in the beginning of shofar, by the beginning of the tekiyas demiyushiv. So you can't be mafsik between the bracha and the completion of the mitzvah. Ois cut and test. This is not only the baltekeya, not only the one who's blowing the shofar can't be masik, v'lo yatzibur, the tzibur who's listening to the shofar also can't be masik. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, tahalo yotzu biberachos, because they listened to the bracha of the baltekeya, and they said Amen, and they had in mind to be yoytze with the brachos of the Baal Tekeah. So therefore, it says the Chavetz Chaim, v'hevi ki'ilu berchu la'atzman. This is all based on the halachah of shomea ka'oneh, somebody who hears and pays attention and is mechavein and says Amen to a bracha. Shomea, he listened with kavana ka'oneh. It's as if he said it himself. So when you listen to the bracha and you have kavana to be yoytze with the brachas, and you say Amen, it's as if you yourself made the bracha, and you can't be masik between making the bracha and the completion of the mitzvah. Eis Katan Yud, the Mechaber said that you're not masik between the tekiyas de meyushiv and the tekiyas de me'umid. Says the Chavetz Chaim Eis Katan Yud, ubishas ha-tekiyas atzman, during the blowing of the shofar itself, when you're sitting and you're listening to the sounds of the shofar. I'm telling you, these phones could be so downright annoying. Okay. Ubeshasa tekiyas atzman, during the blowing of the shofar itself, pshita da'asur l'suach. It's obvious that you're not allowed to speak in the middle of listening to the blowing of the shofar, to the sounds of the shofar itself. Va'afilu l'roik asur. Says the Chavetz Chaim, even l'roik, even to expectorate some spittle or some phlegm from your mouth is forbidden. Why? Because when you listen to the sounds of the shofar, you need to hear every sound of the shofar, and you need to hear the complete sound of the shofar. Me'roisha l'sofa, from the beginning of the sound until the end of the sound. Va'afilu hi aruka harbe, and even if the sound is very long. So like we explained earlier, let's say the length of a tekiah, by tekiah shvarim true tekiah, is approximately 4 seconds. And let's say the Baal Tekeah wants to make sure that he blows a long enough tekiah, so he blows an 8-second tekiah. You might think, you're listening, all right, I already heard 4 seconds, now I'll stop paying attention, now I'll stop listening. No, even though you heard 4 seconds of tekiah, you didn't hear a full tekiah. A tekiah has to have a rosh, it has to have a beginning, and it has to have a seif, it has to have an end. So if he blew an 8-second tekiah, you got to listen to the entire 8-second tekiah. K'maisha kasav b'siman tavkov tzadik. We saw this earlier in Siman tavkov tzadik, and this is a reference to Siman tavkov tzadik sivav on samach hey amid beis, where the Mechaber told us the halachah that if somebody blew a tekiah that's long enough to be 2 tekiyas, so like I said, he blew an 8-second tekiah, so an 8-second tekiah is long enough to be 2 tekiyas, and he had in mind that it should serve as 2 tekiyas. So he started off the shofar blowing, and he blew a tekiah, then he blew a shofar, a trua, now he blows another tekiah, but he wants that tekiah to serve as the second tekiah of the first set, and the first tekiah of the second set. So he blew an 8-second long tekiah, and he wants it to serve as 2 tekiyas. So the Mechaber brought down 2 shitas. The Mechaber brought down one shita that it only works as 1 tekiah. It works as the second tekiah of the first set. But he brought down another shita that holds that it doesn't even work as 1 tekiah. Why? Because since he had in mind that he wanted to serve as 2 tekiyas, and it cannot serve as 2 tekiyas. Why? Because every tekiah has to have a rosh and a seif. It has to have a beginning and an end. How can it be 2 tekiyas? The first half of it had a rosh, it had a beginning, but it didn't have a seif. The second half had a seif, it had an end, but it didn't have a rosh. So both halves of the tekiah are deficient. So the second opinion in the Mechaber in Tavkot Tzadik holds that it's not even good as 1 tekiah. So here in Tavkot Tzadik you saw already the concept that every koil has to have a rosh and a seif. And that's why the Mishnah Berurah said earlier, I think in Tavkuf Pei Zayin, in Eis Katan Yud Dalet, Tavkuf Pei Zayin, in Eis Katan Yud Dalet, it's on Samach Beis Amid Aleph, the Mishnah Berurah wrote, V'hu adin nami, the same halachah applies. Im kol tekiah haya b'chiyuv, if a Baal Tekeah blew a beautiful tekiah, a nice long tekiah, ela shehu nichnas be'emtza ha-tekiah, you walked into shul in middle of the tekiah. Oisha yotza mi beis hakneses be'emtza ha-tekiah. Let's say you were in shul by the tekiyas de meyushiv, and you know that your wife is waiting for you outside. She came for the Tekiyas D'Miyushiv, and she's going to leave right after the Tekiyas D'Miyushiv. And you want to wave goodbye to her. You can't say goodbye because you can't speak. So you decided, I'm going to walk out of shul, and I'm going to see her right after the Tekiyas D'Miyushiv. So it came to the last Tekiyah of the Tekiyas D'Miyushiv, and the Baal Tekiyah is blowing a nice long Tekiyah. And you already heard 4 seconds, so you think already I could walk out the door. And now you walk out the door and you didn't hear the full Tekiyah. You're not Yoitza. You need to hear the full Tekiyah. So again, let's go back to Samach Zayin Amud Beis, where in the Mishnah Berurah is Cut and Yud. That's why the Mishnah Berurah says you can't make any noise during the Kailos. Va'afilu l'roi kaser. Levisha tzarech l'shmaya kol Tekiyah me'rosh l'saifa. Afilu hi aruka harbe, k'masher kaser b'simen tavkov tzadik. The chol shekain, certainly, the asr lahashmiya koil, you're not allowed to make noise during the blowing of the shofar, bepihuk, with sneezing or coughing, or by clearing your throat, because by doing so, you confuse and you throw off the people that are trying to listen to the shofar, and it could be that somebody will miss part of the koil, and he misses part of the koil, he's not yoitza. Okay. So far here, we had over here in Sif Gimel, the halachah, that you're not allowed to be mesiach, you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to be mafsik b'dibur between any of the shofar blowing. Okay. Ois kat yud aleph, l'tekiyah shema umid. The way the Mechaber wrote the halacha is, he said you can't be mafsik between the Tekiyas D'Miyushiv, between the first 30 kailos that we blow before mussaf, and the Tekiyas D'Mu'umid that we blow in the middle of Chazaras HaShatz. Ois kat yud aleph, l'tekiyah shema umid. Says the Chavetz Chaim, don't think that the halacha is that you can't be mafsik between the Tekiyas D'Miyushiv and the Tekiyas D'Mu'umid. But within the Tekiyas D'Miyushiv themselves, or within the Tekiyas D'Mu'umid themselves, you are allowed to be mafsik. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no way. V'hu adin, the same halacha applies. Bein ha-Tekiyah shemiyushiv v'chein shemu'umid gufa. Certainly, you're also not allowed to be mafsik within the Tekiyah shemiyushiv or within the Tekiyas D'Mu'umid themselves. Obviously, you're not allowed to be mafsik. Okay, now we go to the Ramah, 3 lines down. Miu, however, says the Ramah, be'inyan ha-tekiyos v'ha-tfilos ein hefsek. If you need to speak about the tekiyos or about the tfilos, then you are allowed to be mafsik. So let's say the makri and the Baal Tekiyah have to have a little discussion by the bima. Right? Whether a shvarim was a good shvarim, or he blew something right, or he blew something wrong, or the makri has to instruct the Baal Tekiyah where to go back to, or the Baal Tekiyah wants to ask the makri a question. Or let's say the gabbai has to come and he has to speak to somebody. He has to go up to the chazan, and he has to speak to the chazan something about the tefillah. That, the Ramah says, is not a hefsek. Miu be'inyan ha-tekiyos v'ha-tfilos ein hefsek. If you have to speak about the blowing of the shofar itself, or about the davening, that is not a hefsek. Now, I just want to point out that you might be tempted to read the Ramah by saying, Mihu be'inyan ha-tekiyos, if you need to discuss the shofar blowing, v'ha-tfilos, and the davening itself, ain't hefsek. That's not a hefsek. And then the Ramah would be telling me that you could speak about the mitzvah of shofar. Like I said, the Baal Tekiyah and the makri could have a discussion. And also, don't think that the davening that you're davening, even if you put in extra piyutim or this or that, don't think that the davening is a hefsek. The davening is not a hefsek. That's not what the Ramah means. I know that because this Ramah is brought down from the Mordechai and the Maharil. That's where he's bringing this halachah from. And the lashon of the Maharil is, achein, nevertheless, davar hashayich l'tekiyos u'letfila, things that pertain to the blowing of the shofar and to the davening, Rashon Lisa Velitain Ish Imrayehu, a person could speak to another one about these things, Delay Miskiri Hefsik, because that's not called a Hefsik. So like I said, if the Gabbai needs to speak to the Chazan, something to do with the davening, or maybe the Gabbai has to give instructions to somebody who's going up to open the Aron, to close the Aron, and he doesn't understand when he's supposed to do what, and he has to instruct him, that's a davar ashayach l'tfila. That has something to do with the davening. So that's not a hefsek. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud Beis. Va'tfilos ein hefsek. What the Rama wants to say is, debein tekiyos to miyushav l'ma'umid, during this whole time period, between the tekiyos to miyushav before mussaf and the tekiyos to ma'um in the middle of mussaf, shari lechatchila lahasiach me'in yanam. You're allowed to speak if you're speaking about the tekiyos or about the davening. V'ayin b'derech hachayim. Now the Chavetz Chaim wants to show you how strict this is. He says, take a look at the Sefer Derech HaChaim. Shadaita, it's his opinion, the bein habracha, that between the bracha of Lishmaya Kol Shofar and Shechiyanu, ad soif tekiyos to miyushiv, until the end of the first 30 kolos, until the end of the tekiyos to miyushiv, also lahafsik afilu b'tfilos. You're not allowed to be mafsik even with a tefillah. Lachein, therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim in the name of the Derech Chaim, La Yomar haYihiratzon hanitfas b'machzorim. You should not say the hiratzon that appears. If you take a look in the machzer and you look at the tekiyos demiyushiv, you have, after each set of the shofar blowing, you have a yiratzon. Yiratzon mulfanecha shetikiyas tiyas shvarm trua tikiya she'anachnu toikem hayom teimu rukemes b'yiri al yedei mamuneh, etc., etc. And we have a yiratzon printed in the machzer after the set of tikiya shvarm trua tikiya, another one after the set of tikiya shvarm tikiya, and another one after the tikiya trua tikiya. So the Derech Chaim says, don't say it, because we don't want you to be masik between the brachos of shofar and the completion of the first 30 kolos. Rather, Yahara Balibai, you could look at the words of the Yiratzon and have them in mind, Val Yotzi Befiv, but do not enunciate them. Or alternately, Sheyarma Yehiratzon Akagamar Tkiyas Tamiyushiv. Or you could do what I know our minig is in the yeshivas, that you say the Yiratzon after the final set of the Tkiyas Tamiyushiv. After the set of Tkiyah, Trua Tkiyah, after that set, you already completed the first 30 kolos, so you yoytze the mitzvah daraisa of shofar. Now you could go ahead and you could say a yiratzon. Now we continue the words of the Ramah, end of the third line. V'imsach. All right, so we have the halacha here that you're not allowed to be mafsik during shofar. You're not allowed to be mafsik all the way from the recitation of the berachos all the way until the end of the last kolos of shofar at the end of davening. Okay, and you're allowed to be mafsik if it's l'tzorich, if it's for shofar, and if it's for davening. Now says the Ramah, v'imsach dvar b'telim. Let's say you taka forgot, and you taka war mafsik. You did speak somewhere in middle of shofar, and and it was dvar b'telim. No excuse. Says the Ramah, ein tzarich lachzor ulevarich. B'di'eved, you do not have to make another bracha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, he's cutting Yud Gimel. Ein tzarich lachzor levarich. Now, the Chavetz Chaim makes over here a very interesting chilik between two different halachas. On the one hand, over here, what's our scenario? The Baal Tekeya made a bracha l'shmaya kol shofar, and he made a bracha shechiyanu. Those are berachos ha-mitzvahs. And he was moitzi you in his bracha. You had kavanah to be yoitza with the kavanah of the Baal Tekeya. You said amen. And now you're performing a mitzvah. So let's say you already heard the first 30 kolos. Now it's the middle of chazaras hashatz and mussaf, somewhere in middle before you completed all the shofar blowing. And now you started talking. Dvarim b'telim. The Ramah says, b'di'eved, you don't have to make another bracha. You're still covered by the original brachas that took place before the tekiyas demiyushiv. On the other hand, we have a halacha by hilchas tefillin. Let's say somebody made a bracha on his tefillin, Asher kedishanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu l'haniach tefillin. That's a berachos hamitzvahs. Now he put on his shel yad. Now he takes out the shel rosh, and he was mafsik b'dibur. He spoke between putting on the shel yad and the shel rosh, and he was mafsik with dvarim b'telim. Now the halachah is, when he goes to put on his shel rosh, he has to make a new bracha of l'haniach tefillin. He has to make the bracha of al mitzvahs tefillin. We always make a bracha of al mitzvahs tefillin on the shel rosh, but he also has to make a new bracha of l'haniach tefillin on the putting on of his shel rosh. Why? Because the original bracha of l'haniach tefillin is gone. You are mafsik b'dibur. So you made a bracha of l'haniach tefillin. You didn't get put on your shel rosh. You are mafsik b'dibur. You lost the bracha of l'haniach tefillin. So now you have to make a new l'haniach tefillin on putting on the shel rosh. So you might look at these two halachas and say, I don't understand. If by being mafsik b'dibur between the hanacha of the shel yad and the hanacha of the shel rosh, you lose the bracha of l'haniach tefillin, and you have to make a new bracha of l'haniach tefillin on the shel rosh, why don't we say the same thing by shofar? We should say, you made a bracha l'shmaya kol shofar, you heard the first 30 kolos, now you are mafsik between the tekiyas d'miyushiv and the tekiyas d'ma'umid, so now you lost the bracha, now you have to make a new bracha. So in this Mishnah Berurah is cut in Yud Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah explains the chilik between these two halachas. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ein tzarech lachzor levarich. If b'di'eved you were masik and you spoke dvarim b'telim between the tekiyas d'miyushiv and the tekiyas d'ma'umid, you're not mechuyev to make another bracha. V'lo dami l'sach bein tefillin l'tefillin. And this is not comparable to the halacha of one who was masik b'dibur between putting on the shel yad and putting on the shel rosh, where over there the halacha is that you do need another bracha. Why? Tahasam, because over there by tefillin, shtei mitzvahs hein. Over there, it's two separate mitzvahs. What does the pasuk say? Ukeshartam la'ois al yodecha. You should tie on the tefillin as a sign on your arm. V'hayu l'taytafais beineinecha. And it should be for tefillin between your eyes. That's the shel rosh. Two different mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah of shel yad, and there's a mitzvah of shel rosh. Now we paskin that you need a bracha of l'haniach on both of them. So normally you make a bracha of l'haniach, you put on the shel yad. You are now yoytze the mitzvah of the shel yad. But the bracha of l'haniach also goes on a separate mitzvah. It goes on the mitzvah of the shel rosh too. But now if you're mafsik b'dibur between putting on the shel yad and putting on the shel rosh, it turns out that you made a hefsik between the bracha of l'haniach and the beginning of the mitzvah of putting on the shel rosh. Hold it. Now it's as if you made a bracha of l'shmaya kol shofar, and you are mafsik between the bracha and between the beginning of being yoytze the mitzvah. Let's say you make a bracha shekidishanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu on the tilas lulav. You make a bracha on the lulav and esrei. And now you start a conversation with somebody before you ever picked up the lulav and esrei. And now you go pick up the lulav and esrei. You are mafsik between the bracha and the mitzvah. You need a new bracha. So the same thing by tefillin. If you made a lahaniach, and now you are mafsik between the lahaniach and putting on the shel rosh, you are mafsik between making the bracha and between starting to perform the mitzvah. Putting on the shel yad was not starting to put on the mitzvah. Putting on the shel yad was starting the mitzvah of the shel yad and completing the mitzvah of the shel yad. But now you've got to do the mitzvah of putting on the shel rosh. If you are mafsik between the laniach and when you start putting on the shel rosh, b'dibur, you need a new bracha. But that's not the case here by shofar. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Masha ein kein hacha. That logic doesn't apply here by shofar. To kula chada mitzvahi, because the tekiyas d'miyushiv and the tekiyas d'ma'umid are all part of one mitzvah. So memela, when you made the bracha of l'shmaya kol shofar, and then you blew the tekiyas d'ma'umid, you already began to perform the mitzvah of shofar. Now, if you make a hefsik b'dibur, you weren't mafsik between the bracha and the beginning of the mitzvah. You are mafsik in middle of your performance of the mitzvah. But that doesn't cost you the bracha. The bracha is still connected to the mitzvah. You made the bracha and you started to perform the mitzvah. So yes, you're not supposed to be mafsik in the middle of your performance of the mitzvah, but you don't lose the bracha. V'alkein, therefore, afilu sach dvarim betelim, even if you speak dvarim betelim, bein tekiyas to be yoshev atzman, in middle of the first 30 kolos, ein tzarech lachzar levarech, you do not have to make a new bracha, because you made the bracha and you began to perform the mitzvah. So the bracha is connected to the mitzvah, you don't lose the bracha. Midi dahava, this is comparable to another halacha. Mi shemedaber achar shetam ma'at mi berachos hamoitzi. Let's say you make a bracha hamoitzi lechem in haaretz. So if you make a bracha hamoitzi lechem in haaretz, and then you start a conversation with somebody before you start eating the bread, it's a bracha levatala, you need a new bracha. But if you make a hamoitzi and you take a tiny bit of bread and you eat it, even though you didn't eat enough bread, but it doesn't matter, you started to eat the bread. So the bracha is connected to the eating, and now, even if you're mafsik, you can keep on eating. Because that bracha went on all of your eating, and it's all one act of eating that's connected to the bracha. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, the Achronim lean to say, if somebody spoke in middle of Tekiya Shvarim Trua Tekiya, Bein Shvarim Letrua, between the Shvarim and the Trua, Af Bein Yonei Tekiya, even if the speech was about the shofar blowing itself, Af She'ein Tzarech Lachzor Levarich, even though you don't have to make a new bracha, Mikol Makom Lo Yotza, you're not Yotza V'Tzarech Lachzor V'Liskaya Oisei Seder. So what happened over here is, the Baal Tekiya is blowing shofar, and he blew his tekiya, and then he's got to blow a shvarim trua. So the Makri says, tekiya, shvarim trua. Was that a good shvarim? He starts a conversation with the Baal Tekiya. Baal Tekiya says, yeah, it's fine. Okay, so now I'll blow the trua. No good. Why? The reason it's no good is because even though the hefsik bedibur that I made between the shvarim and the trua was made in yonei hatekiya, so technically it's not a hefsik because it's tzarchei mitzvah, but I didn't blow a shvarim trua. The whole reason we blow a shvarim trua is to be yoitz of the shita that a trua is a shvarim trua, but I didn't blow a shvarim trua. I blew a shvarim, then I spoke, then I blew a trua. That's not a shvarim trua. Now, do you lose the bracha? No. The reason you don't lose the bracha is because you made the bracha and then you began the performance of the mitzvah. You blew the tekiya. So no problem. You already began the performance of the mitzvah. You connected the bracha to the mitzvah. You don't lose the bracha. But you are masik in the shvarim trua, so it's not a real shvarim trua. So then what is it? It's a foreign koil. Now you got to go back to the first tekiya. Okay. That's why the Mishnah Berurah ends off on his cutting Yud Gimel. V'tzarech lachzor v'liskaya oisei seder. You have to re-blow that whole line, the whole tekiya shvarim trua tekiya. You have to blow the whole thing again, because if you messed up the shvarim trua, then it's a foreign koil. Okay, now let's continue the mechaber. 4 lines down the middle of the line. Ve'ein tzarech loymar, and the mechaber says, we're talking about the problem of being mafsik between the brachos and the kolos of the shofar, or being mafsik somewhere in the middle of the shofar blowing. And we said you can't be mafsik. What did the mechaber say? The mechaber said you can't be mafsik between the tekiyas to b'yushav and the tekiyas to muhammad. Now it says the mechaber ve'ein tzarech loymar. There's no need to say shelo yasichu ben bracha la tekiyos. Certainly, like I've been saying, you can't be mafsik between the bracha and beginning the performance of the mitzvah. You can't be mafsik between the bracha and when you start shofar blowing, imloy be'inyan tekiyos, unless it was necessary for the tekiyos. And we'll have to see in the Mishnah Berurah what that means. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. He's cutting your dalet. Be'inyan tekiyos. You can't be mafsik between the bracha and the shofar blowing, unless it's be'inyan tekiyos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, hold on. V'af de b'simen kuf samach zayin sivov. Pasak de l'chatkila lo yafsik klal. In simen kuf samach zayin, the Mechaber is discussing the halachas that pertain to a Suda. He says, you made a bracha on Hamoitzi, you can't be masik between the Hamoitzi and the eating. And he's talking about a case over there, I'll tell you right away, Kuf Samach Zayin. Kuf Samach Zayin. Sivav, right? Yoichal miyad. You make a bracha of Hamoitzi, you have to eat right away. V'lo yasiach ben bracha la'achila. You can't be mafsik between the bracha and the eating. V'imsach, and if you are mafsik b'dibur, if you speak between the Hamoitzi and the eating, tzarich lachzor levarich. You have to make a new bracha. Ela imkein haisa hasicha b'dvarim me'inyan dvarim shemevarchin alav. Unless you were speaking about what you're doing. For instance, kigon sheberach alapas. For example, somebody made a bracha of Hamoitzi on bread. The kaidim sha'achal, and then before he ate bread, Amar, he said, Haviyu melach, bring salt, I lifton, or bring me a dip. Or, Tenu l'ploini lechel, or he made the bracha Hamoitzi lechem v'naretz, he took a piece, gave it to somebody, he said, give it to ploini. Tenu meichel l'behema, or he said, he made a bracha Hamoitzi, now he remembers, I'm not supposed to eat because I didn't feed my animals yet. So he tells somebody, go and feed the animals. The kiyotze be'elu, eino tzarich levarich. Then the Mechaber says, you don't have to make a bracha over again. That's the Mechaber. But the Ramah says, when we come lechatchila lo-yafsik klal, lechatchila, you shouldn't be mafsik at all. That's what the Ramah says. So, over here, it says the Chavetz Chaim, you're telling me over here in Hilchos Shofar, that if you are mafsik between the bracha and the shofar blowing, and you are mafsik be'inyan hatekiyos, you are mafsik for the purposes of tekiyah shofar, then the Mechaber said, it's okay, you don't have to make another bracha. So says the Mishnah Berurah, v'after b'siman kuf samach zayin sivav pasuk l'chatchila lo yafsik klal. Over there, by Hamoitzi, we say that l'chatchila you should be mafsik at all. So why are we letting you be mafsik over here if it's l'tzarech hatekiyos? Over there, we don't let you be mafsik l'tzarech Hamoitzi. We don't let you go ahead and ask for salt. Over here, when the Mechaber says that if you are mafsik be'inyan hatekiyos, you don't have to make another bracha, that's shetzarich l'suach, where you have no choice. You have to speak. What's the case? Kigoyin, for example, sha'omer lahavi shofar. He has to ask somebody to bring a shofar. Or to wash out the shofar with water. Because there's something wrong with the shofar and he can't blow it. The kayotzabai. Upashut, and it's obvious, says the Chavetz Chaim, dimsach bein bracha la tekiya me'inyan tefillah. If you are mafsik between the brachas and the beginning of the shofar blowing, me'inyan tefillah, something that has to do with the davening, the tzarich lachzor levarich, you have to make another bracha. That has nothing to do with the shofar. If you made the bracha, you picked up the shofar, you started trying to blow, and it's not working. You picked up your second shofar, you started trying to blow, it's not working. So now you ask somebody, quick, bring me another shofar. You have no choice. You made a bracha, you got to blow shofar. You got to ask somebody to bring you a shofar. But you made the bracha, and now before you start blowing shofar, you turn to the Baal Mussaf and you say, listen, the shofar blowing is going to take me about 10 minutes now, so figure that you're going to start mussaf at 1 o'clock. No, then you got to make another bracha. When the Ramah said earlier that tefillah is not a hefsek, that meant in the middle of the shofar blowing. That's Hayoim Harasolam is not a hefsek. If you say it after the Tekiyas T'mu'umin are finished, it's not a hefsek between the Tekiyas T'mu'umin and the Tekiyas T'miyushiv. But between the bracha and the beginning of the shofar blowing, even Sarchei Tefillah are a hefsek. Avol ben bracha and Tekiyah have a hefsek. V'afa shemeya, and this halachah applies to the people who are listening to the shofar blowing as well. Im sach ben bracha and Tekiyah, if they're mafsik b'dibur, between the berachos and the shofar blowing, tzarich levarich, they have to make another bracha. Now I want to point out something interesting here, and that is that over here in the beginning of Eis Katan Yudalid, The Mishnah Berurah uses as an example of somebody who tzorich lasuach, somebody who must speak between the bracha and the blowing of the shofar. His example is if he has to say, "Bring me a shofar." Now that's very interesting, and I'll tell you why. Let's say it's Sukkot, and somebody wants to be yotze the mitzvah of lulav and esrei. He doesn't have a lulav and esrei. Okay, he goes into the sukkah, and he says, I really want to be yotze the mitzvah of lulav. I don't have a lulav. What should I do? I don't know. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al netilas lulav. He makes a bracha on lulav, and he doesn't have a lulav. Then suddenly the doors of the sukkah open up, and in walks Eliyahu Hanavi with a lulav and esrei. Mamish, look at that! How beautiful! I wanted to be yotze the mitzvah. I made a bracha on lulav, and even though I didn't have one, and Mamish Eliyahu Hanavi walked in and gave me a lulav. His bracha was a bracha of HaTorah. If he wants to take the lulav and esrei that Eliyahu Hanavi brought him, he's got to make a new bracha. And his bracha was a bracha of HaTorah, and he wasn't allowed to make that bracha. And don't tell me that he was a maimin, that somebody was going to bring him a lulav. If you don't have a lulav to be yotze the mitzvah of lulav, how dare you make a bracha of asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al netilas lulav? It's a bracha of HaTorah, you don't have a lulav. And even if somebody happens perchance to bring you a lulav, your bracha was a bracha of HaTorah, it's not chal. You have to make another bracha. It's like somebody has a tithe for an apple. He doesn't have an apple. He says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam berachos. And now somebody brings him an apple. You're not allowed to eat that apple. Your bracha was a bracha of HaTorah. Even more, you have an apple. You're holding a beautiful apple. You make a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam berachos. You're in the zoo, and you drop the apple, and the apple falls into the crocodile enclosure. Goodbye, apple. Now suddenly somebody walks up to you from 6 feet away, social distancing, and he says, Rabbi Yid, I saw what happened. Here's an apple. You're not allowed to eat the apple. You got to make a new bracha. Your bracha is gone. Now over there, you didn't do an avla. You didn't make a bracha of HaTorah. But now your bracha is gone because your bracha went on this apple. You didn't know there was another apple. If you have another apple in your knapsack, you could take out another apple from your knapsack and eat that apple. But if you didn't know that there was another apple anywhere, so then your bracha was on this apple, and now the apple is residing happily in the stomach of the crocodile, you can't eat another apple. You need a new bracha. So too, if the Baltekeah goes up to the bima, and there's no shofar, and he makes a bracha, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu l'shmaya kol shofar, and then, no shofar. He can't just tell somebody, bring me a shofar, and take the shofar and stop blowing shofar. The bracha was a bracha of HaTorah, because there was no shofar. So when we speak about a case where he has to ask somebody to bring the shofar, we must be talking about a case where the Baltekeah had a shofar. Now, besides that shofar, he has a second shofar in his shtender. Then the halachah is that when he makes a bracha, his das is on all of his shofars. So he picked up his number one shofar, he tries blowing, it's not working. He realizes he needs his second string shofar. Normally he brings it with him to the bima. He forgot to bring it to the bima, it's in the shtender. So he says, Rabbi Yid, bring me my shofar from my shtender. But if he had no shofar at all, it would be a bracha of HaTorah. Okay, no, we're a little bit long, but let's finish the Siman. Siv Dalet. Zeh shetekeah kishein yoshvin. The Baltekeah who blows shofar for the Dikias de Meyushiv, the 30 kailos before mussaf, Tekeah al Seder HaBrachos, he should also be the one to blow shofar during Chazaras Hashatz al Seder HaBrachos, al malchiyos, zichronos, and shofaros. We had this halachah previously, and the Mishnah Berurah says in Ois Katan Tezvav, Tekeah al Seder HaBrachos. Why? To hamaskel b'mitzvah, when somebody begins the performance of a mitzvah, Oimrim loy gemar. We'd say to him that it's an inyan for him to finish the mitzvah. So you started, you were the Baltekeah for the Dikias de Meyushiv, you should also be the Baltekeah for the Dikias de Me'umid. Now we said, unless this is the Shliach Tzibur for Musaf, if the Shliach Tzibur happens to be a Baltekeah, so he blows the Dikias de Meyushiv, but now he's davening Musaf for the Amud, then we don't want him to blow the tekiyas mu'umid because we're afraid it's going to mess up his concentration. It's going to mess up his chazaras hashatz. So then we ask somebody else to blow the tekiyas mu'umid. Says the Ramah, Haga, umiyu einay ma'akev. This is not ma'akev. You could have two different people blow the tekiyas mu'umid and the tekiyas miyushiv. The yachal achar l'skaya. Somebody else is allowed to blow the other tekiyas. Ela rather sharoi lasis kach. It's proper that misham askel mamitzar b'm lagmar. Ukfar kasafti leil sim tavkuf pei hey sif dalid. We discussed this already previously in sim tavkuf pei hey sif dalid. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut into Zayin achar l'skaya. Somebody else is allowed to blow. V'ayimid b'm kaimai. Very interesting Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says we know that the tekiyas to miyushiv, it's brought down. We had earlier. You're supposed to blow by the bima, but the tekiyas to mu'umid. So whoever's blowing it could blow it at his seat in the mismedrash. You don't have to go to the bima. Ve'in tzarich lamed ala bima. You don't have to go to the bima. Now we said that the reason you blow by the bima is because we want to be mitzaref the schus HaTorah together with the shofar. That the schus of limud HaTorah and the bima is where we lane from the Torah. The schus of Torah should go up with the shofar blowing, and it should stand as a schus, as a merit for Klal Yisrael. How come that applies to the tekiyas the miyushiv and not the tekiyas the mu'umid? So I saw brought down. I think it might even be in a Dirshu footnote. They bring down a very cute vart from Shmuel Kamenetsky, where they say that by really there's a kasha by shofar blowing. We know Zrizin Magdim and Lemitzvahs. And we had earlier that the Siman of shofar blowing begins right away at the beginning of the morning. Neitzachama, you can already blow shofar. So why are we blowing shofar so late? Why don't we say Zrizin Magdimin? So we said one reason is because there was a point in time where there were xeris on Klal Yisrael, and they had to postpone the shofar blowing until a point when the non-Jews weren't expecting it. And it was a sakana to blow shofar early. So because of that, we always blow shofar late. It's brought down that because of that, we want the schus of Torah to go up together with the shofar blowing, because we're already a little bit guilty. We delayed shofar blowing from Neitzachama until after Shachris. So we blow by the bima to have the schus of Torah. But that only applies to the tekiyas to miyushiv. Once we blew the tekiyas to miyushiv, we were already yotze the mitzvah daraisa. Once we were yotze the mitzvah daraisa, we don't need so much the schus of Torah anymore to protect us. Now we could blow even away from the bima. I was cutting your Zion. It's not ma'akiv. Somebody else is allowed to blow the tekiyas to mu'umid. Doesn't have to be the one who blew the tekiyas to miyushiv. I was cutting your Zion. Shiroi lasos kach. It's proper that the same person should do both. The chol zeh ma'iri bizmanehem. Chavetz Chaim says this applies to the days of the Ramah. Shahu noisted lo l'skaya b'stama, where they took a baltekeya and they gave him to blow the shofar. And the default position was that he's going to blow all of the kailos. He's going to blow the tekiyas to miyushiv and the tekiyas to mu'umid. V'imkein zachem miyad b'chol tekiyas. So since that's the default, when you give somebody over to be the baltekeya, the expectation is that means the tekiyas to miyushiv and the tekiyas to mu'umid. Aval achshav, but the Chavetz Chaim says nowadays, shenoi hagin b'ktsas mekaymos, where in some places they have the minute, litein astarim la'acher, where they're mechabed one person to blow the kailos of malchiyos, they're mechabed another one to blow by zichronos, they're mechabed another one to blow by shofaros. So then there is no such expectation that when they ask you to blow shofar, you're going to blow the whole thing. So then the first baltekeya who blows the tekiyas to miyushiv, he wasn't zayche in all of the blowing. There is no such expectation. V'shari, and then it's certainly mutter to give the tekiyas to mu'umid to somebody else to blow. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's revus and parnasa to all those in need, and we should be zaycha to see the bias gal tzedek b'mhera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.